Welcome to the Mystical Truths Podcast. This is Rebecca, and I'm really glad you're here. Let's unlock your world. I received an email that speaks to a question that I believe a lot of people have. Why do we die the way we do? And I have a lot to say about that, so I thought it would be better to address it here. So thank you, Kim, for the email. And I'm going to read that to you first, and then we'll talk about it. Her email states, my 89-year-old aunt, who was very with it cognitively and lived on her own, was put in inpatient rehab when she fell out of bed. She was fine, but as a precaution, they sent her to the ER. It was the height of COVID, so only I was permitted to be with her. We chatted as we waited for her test results to return. Nothing seemed amiss until she told me, we have to have the doctor do something about these hallucinations. What hallucinations? I asked. I've been seeing people for the last 2 or 3 days. Like right now, there's a man standing next to my bed. I know he's not there, but I can see him. She distinctly described the figure to me. Tall, thin, dark hair, wearing a green suit. I thought maybe it was her son, husband, father, all of who had been deceased for years, but she didn't recognize him. 10 minutes later, we were informed that she had a fatal infection, not COVID, and had only days left to live. I forgot about the hallucinations until about 2 weeks after her death. I know they were her guides waiting for her. The thing is, the doctors gave her 48 hours, and she lasted 12 days in hospice. She was a chronic pain patient, and they didn't understand she required more meds than what would typically be given. Physically, it looked like she was suffering at times, and I advocated fiercely for what she needed. It was torture for me to watch it all unfold. Why did she have to linger and suffer? She was coherent for 48 hours, said goodbye to family, saw her priest, before she lost consciousness. Then she lingered and suffered for 10 days, and that's what bothers me. Not that she passed, although I do miss her. Knowing the man in the green suit was there tells me it was her time, and that brings me comfort. I worried that I made the wrong healthcare decisions for her, and I was beating myself up over it until I remembered our hallucination discussion. Why do we die the way we do? Well, first, we have to understand that we do have that instinct to survive. So something has to override that at some point. And every death is specifically and brilliantly synchronizing for that person. And I chose the word synchronizing there because it's not synchronized. It's done, but it's not pre-programmed necessarily. We attract everything to us, but we're part of a sort of a mechanical system here that is synchronizing beautifully according to what we're offering energetically, to what we believe, to what we have come to. So that death thing is going to happen when it's somebody's day to die, so to speak. And there isn't a specific date, but when it's come to that, it's going to happen. The funniest things are there or are not there to make sure that that happens precisely. And so when people say, I'm really beating myself up because I should have done this or could have done that, or why wasn't that person there, or why didn't that happen? Because that's just the way it goes. You can't stop that train. You can't interfere with that process. People try to, and sometimes it looks like we did, but it's all part of the unfolding. The intelligence of life knows how to get us through our resistances and out of our bodies. So if we really take a softer look at how this unfolds, we'll see the honey in it, because there's always a lot of honey in it, way more than I think we can even see. So back to some of the points that Kim makes in her email here. The man or the figure that her aunt was seeing wasn't somebody that she recognized, because it wasn't even a person. It's the intelligence of life offering a vibration that she, without realizing it, sort of configured into this figure. It's known what is easiest for us to connect with or what's easiest for us to see. Sometimes it is the image of someone that we spend a life with here, because we are not that image once we leave our physical bodies, but we certainly can project that image so that you would interpret it as that person. So it could be the energy of someone you knew here. But in her case, that wasn't what needed to blend with her. Just a comforting figure was good enough. And maybe she saw more. She said hallucinations, but I'm sure there were more. So why? Why would we start to see, and this is very common, images that aren't really there, but they are, right? They're not there physically, but they're really there. Because it's a readiness that's happening. Some people just leave their bodies. But sometimes we need an unfolding. And it does help when we start to blend with the other side as that is happening. Now, as far as the doctor saying that she had 48 hours to live and she lingered for 12 days, I don't think it's fair of the medical community to put a number or a date or an amount of time on when we're going to pass. That's pretty much not something that we can guesstimate. And I don't think it's fair to guesstimate because you can't unhear that, right? So when a doctor says to somebody, you have 6 months to live, or you have 2 weeks to live, you can't unhear that. And in her case, it wasn't 48 hours. And I know they do their best in trying to just let you know that this is a thing. But in her case, a little more time was appropriate for her. So she did have that couple days where she was conscious and wrapped up a few loose ends that felt good to her. But it wasn't quite time for that transition to happen. So how sweet that she slipped out of consciousness and sort of maybe laid between the two worlds. And to us, it does look uncomfortable, especially when we believe that person is in pain. It's a different experience for them. It's a different interpretation than what it generally looks like for us. So I don't believe she was laying there in torture all of that time. She most likely, more often than not, and maybe not at all, was even aware of what was going on. So us feeling bad about that process that we can't really do a whole lot about isn't helpful. It's more helpful to know everything's working out. We'll do our best to make her comfortable, but this is her experience to have. And we are not orchestrating this experience. We're watching it. We're being a part of it. So I'll give you an example. My mother was a very kind, beautiful, sensitive person. And because she was so nice and sensitive, she was easily taken advantage of. Her feelings were easily hurt. This big world was a big place for her. And I watched over the years, especially toward the end of her life, over several years where, because the world was expanding and technology and crap was happening, even in the family and whatnot, her world became smaller for her benefit. She didn't want to go far away. We lived 20 minutes tops away from each other. And it was like a journey for her to come to where I lived. And she wanted to do that less and less. She went from going anywhere in our general area to just going so far. And then it got to where she would just stay in the town or maybe the next town over from where she grew up and where she lived her whole life. And then it got to where she would maybe go to a grocery store or a club nearby that she liked to visit. And that was it. She just went less and less. And we noticed that her mind was starting to slip. We discovered at some point that she had Alzheimer's. We knew that, but we got that diagnosis. And I watched as her world then became so small that it was just in her apartment. And then it was just in her space. And she was in her apartment and in her space consciously less and less. And that continued to happen until she was sort of no longer there for the most part. And we had her in hospice She was not able to get up. She was not able to eat or drink anymore. And that was hard to watch. It was really hard, especially for my brother and sister to watch, because their perception is a little different on this. And it was very difficult for my brother because he was her primary caretaker. And the hospice nurse said to him he wanted to feed her with a syringe, anything he could to get nutrition into her. And she said, it doesn't register in her that she's starving. It doesn't register to her what all is going on. And that made sense to me, because when you withdraw, even though it's not a conscious thing, she wasn't thinking, I want my world to become smaller and smaller. It was just what was fitting her, what was fitting her, what was fitting her. And so Alzheimer's made sense to that, because that allowed her world to get more inward and more inward, less external and less external, easier to handle. And then, there just comes that point where they're not in this world, where the body's still here, but they're really not. It's a pleasant thing when you think about it from that angle. And she did say at certain times that she saw, like, her grandmother over there, and the grandmother's over there, get her something to eat. And my brother said, you're not seeing, there's nobody over there. And I said, let's just say I don't see anybody over there, because she does. And whether anybody believes that or not doesn't matter, because if she says she sees it, she sees it. And one thing about people with Alzheimer's is they just want to be in a happy place. If you push their buttons, or they're standing and you tell them you've been standing too long, you have to sit down, they'll stand longer. They get angry, they get defiant, they just want to have things nice the way they want them, and to just let me be. She was the sweetest Alzheimer person I think ever, because we just let her be. And she did eventually completely transit out of her body. And I was so happy for her, because I thought that must feel amazing to be in a whole different mindset, a whole different vibrational place, to be whole again, to be whole in her focus again. How amazing. And I was so happy for her. A life well done, but it was not really a comfortable life for the most part. And you wouldn't know that, because she was just so pleasant and so nice. But, she was raised like a lot of people in that Murphy's Law mentality, where the grass is greener on the other side and stuff happens. What are you going to do? So no wonder the world became harder to be a part of, especially being sensitive to what other people think and what other people say and what other people do, what other people have. So you see how if you look for the honey, you'll find it. She got to do this life however she wanted to do it. And could it have been easier? That's irrelevant. Are there easier versions? Of course there are. But I'm sure she got a lot out of this lifetime. I'm sure she expanded and helped eternity be eternal by all of the desiring that she was doing, whether she allowed it or not. And she did allow. So another example, she went slowly, but some people die very quickly. And we wonder, well, you were very healthy. Why did you just leave? It seemed like you were having a good time here. Why did you just go? And the answer to that is a long, drawn-out exit wasn't necessary. It just wasn't the perfect blend for that person. The perfect blend was out. Just quickly out. And every death serves everybody that's paying attention to it. And more, I'm sure. So when we say, well, why did my dad have to die quickly? Why couldn't he have been around for a little longer so that we could have said our goodbyes? Because for him, for anyone else involved, that was just the best blend. So my father, for example, I was just out of high school, and he had heart conditions. He had an open heart surgery, and he was doing fine. One day I walked into the living room, and he was laying on the couch, and he said, "Rebecca, go call the ambulance." And I thought, okay, this is a big deal, because he would never normally even want to go. So just then my mother and brother were coming in, and I said, Mom, Dad wants an ambulance. So she called, and the medics came, and they knew him, a small town. What's going on, Cliff? And he said, I believe I'm having a heart attack. I need to go in. They put the gurney near the couch. We had a very low setting couch, and they let him stand up, turn around, and put himself on the gurney. And I didn't have anything to do with the medical profession at that point, but still, I knew enough to think, well, if he's having a heart attack, he probably shouldn't be getting up off of a couch and putting himself on a gurney. I was really shocked by that. I thought, they know this. What's going on? So off they go with him, and he died in the emergency room. My mother came back and said, he's gone. Interestingly enough, a good friend of my mother's knew somebody that was working in the emergency room that night. And she just happened to be one of the nurses that was caring for my father. So we got the story from her that he got in there and he was still alive. And he said to her nurse, and she turned around and he looked at her name tag and he said, Judy, I'm going to die. And she said, no, Mr. McDade, you're going to be just fine. And he said, no, I'm going to die. And he did. Now, my dad wasn't the type of person to do that. He'd been through different procedures and whatnot. I've never heard him say anything like, oh, that woe is me, or this is the end. So he obviously had some information. He had some connection, some knowing that it was going to be now. So I'm glad that we got that story, but none of it is coincidental. Oh, and by the way, my mother said when she came home from the hospital that on the way to the hospital, she was in the ambulance, that the medics didn't have something that was vital. I don't remember what it was now, that they should have had, because the hospital was very agitated about it, that they should have had that for him, and they just didn't have it in the ambulance. So none of it is, these are the things that we can say, they should have never let him get up and put himself on that gurney. They should have had that thing in the ambulance. We could have come home earlier and called an ambulance earlier. We could have, should have, would have. But at the end of the day, it happens just perfectly. Yeah, they lost their minds for a minute and let him get up and put himself on a gurney. That needed to be an ingredient in his means of exit. They didn't have something they needed in the ambulance. Judy just happened to be working that night and got him as a patient. So all of it synchronizing just perfectly to make sure that his means of exit would happen. So maybe that helps in understanding that we don't die by accident. We don't die by mistake. And I know it does look like it, right? When you fall off a cliff, it looks like a mistake. When somebody rams into another person and a person's killed, when somebody's shot, I know it looks like an out-of-control situation. But I've come to completely understand that the way we exit this life synchronizes for purposes that are meaningful and oftentimes hard for us to understand. But this is life, isn't it? And when we can appreciate what we can find to appreciate, it's easier to live here. It's easier to experience someone else's death. It's easier to contemplate our own. And it's easier not to be afraid of it. Right? I am absolutely not afraid to die. It's something that I really look forward to. It's just nothing that I'm in a hurry to get to. So I've told my children, when I die, this is just my preference, don't put my body in a box and bury it in the ground. Have the body cremated. I don't need it anymore. Do whatever you want with the ashes, because they won't be important to me. If they're important to you, do whatever you like with them. Celebrate my life if you want to. Don't have a funeral. I don't want anybody being sad or feeling obligated to feel sad because I finished my life. I know it's an adjustment, and I know it can feel like a big adjustment, and it can feel like a void, but it doesn't have to. I'm not going anywhere. I just won't be in my physical body anymore. Our conversation can continue, but it's just going to be a different conversation. And you've got everything you need in you to make it through the rest of your life without me being here physically. And that's true of every single one of us. So when you're missing someone, that's just you. That's not them. They're enjoying you. When you're torturing yourself because of the way someone died, because it was so quick, because they didn't have time to say goodbye, or it was so bizarre how they died, or it was so hard to watch because it took long, or it looked painful. Remember this conversation in that it is just what it is. And it is beautifully synchronized for each of us. We are free enough that even without realizing it, we can call a difficult exit in. And I know people are thinking, well, wait a minute, who would do that? That can't be right. Well, we call a difficult life in. We can certainly attract a difficult death experience, and that's okay. That's not wrong. We're learning and expanding from everything that we experience here, and we love the experiential learning because that's what true learning really is, learning by the experience. So my recommendation would be to honor the process, find as much honey as you can. In the moments where it's just hard to comprehend, come back and listen to this again, or form your own connection with the other side, or just take it easy for a minute and know that there is way more going on than we have access to knowing, and that you just have to trust that. So why do we die the way we do? Because it's fitting, even if we don't understand why it's fitting. And I'm sure as we evolve, as the human race evolves, that may become easier. That may become something that we can just do with the ease of leaving our bodies when it's time to go. There are humans that have already done that. When it's time to go, you just leave your body. But as a whole, we're not really there yet. We're still so resistant here that the means of exit oftentimes is harder than it really could be. But that's okay. We're getting there. If you have any questions that you would like answered, you can email them to me at rebecca@mysticaltruths.com. And until we meet again, live your life with joy.